From Wish TV and the All Indiana Podcast Network, this is the News 8 Daily 8 Podcast with Wish TV's Kylie Conway. A Wish TV News 8 update.
Hi, I'm Kylie Conway, and this is your News 8 Daily 8 for Thursday, January 13th. A cooler afternoon for your Thursday. Winds will shift to come out of the northwest and set the stage for this cool down. It'll be a dry day. Highs will be more seasonable, with highs getting into the upper 30s to low 40s. Classroom changes are impacting students across central Indiana. Many IPS students will log on to learn from home, while Pike Township schools are bringing students back into buildings. However, that district is still running into busing issues. The district says it has identified the bus routes that are most likely to be impacted. School officials say families along those routes have been notified. Pike Township is not the only school that has been impacted by COVID. Today, 8 IPS middle and high schools will go remote learning. The impacted high schools are Arsenal Tech, Crispus Attucks, George Washington, and Shortridge. The middle schools are Arlington, Harshman, Longfellow, Medical STEM, and Northwest. The district says the move is due to a high number of their staff being absent from COVID. We wanted to get answers on how to keep schools open, so Wish TV medical expert and former U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams explained how this can happen and what schools are experiencing.
But one of the reasons they're closing schools is because teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers are actually coming down with COVID, and test to stay doesn't help them. What helps them is high vaccination rates within schools and in surrounding communities, and the use of better protective mechanisms like N95 mask or KN95 mask. We've got to use all these layers to keep our kids in school.
According to Adams, the number of COVID cases in kids has doubled since the Delta variant, and we are at peak of pediatric hospitalizations during the entire pandemic. He says if kids and school staff get vaccinated, the better off we are at returning to in-person learning. As far as IPS elementary schools, they will stay in person. The district says the goal is to return to all in-person classes by Wednesday. Tennis star Novak Djokovic is in the field for the Australian Open as he waits to find out if he'll be in the country to actually play. The tournament released its pairings overnight and included Djokovic. He's the defending champion, but the Australian government is trying to force him to leave before the first serve over his COVID-19 vaccination status and inaccuracies on his travel documents. His case is currently in front of the country's immigration minister, who will decide whether to approve a visa and let him stay. And there's an indication that there's a significantly lower risk of dying or going to the hospital with the Omicron variant of COVID-19 compared to the Delta variant. Researchers with the Kaiser Permanente and the CDC looked at more than 52,000 cases. The study shows the risk of hospitalizations was 53% lower for Omicron than Delta. ICU stays are 74% less likely. The risk of death was 91% lower. Researchers also note that hospital stays averaged 1.5 days compared to an average 5 with Delta. We spoke to Dr. Jerome Adams about this as well, and he says while cases seem milder, it all does come down to exposure.
When the CDC director and others are saying it's milder, they're talking about the severity if you get the disease. But remember, your risk of drowning relates to how often you're in the water. Your risk of being at a car wreck relates to how often you're actually driving it on the road. Your true risk from COVID depends on your risk of exposure. And the Omicron variant is 4 to 5 times more contagious.
Other health officials note that those who are vaccinated and boosted are at a lower risk of getting severe illness from the Omicron. A major milestone in the ongoing efforts to curb violence in Indianapolis. It's been a year since the last murder in the Butler-Tarkington neighborhood. The Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition often cites the neighborhood as a gauge of the success of its programs in slowing violent crime and as an example of what could happen for the rest of the city. Indianapolis reached a record in 2021 with 271 homicides. IMPD has arrested 75 people so far. News 8's Aaliyah Hodges wanted to find out what leaders think is working in Butler-Tarkington.
On weeknights, you can find the Indy 10-Point Coalition walking the streets in Butler-Tarkington, bundled up, embracing the cold. This neighborhood has been Anthony Neal's home for 20 years. He joined the coalition after seeing a rise in crime.
Everybody was moving out, heavily drug infested. A lot of shootings.
But not anymore.
When I first got here, you was more so like a prisoner in your own home, you know, and now I've seen the change. I've seen the change.
The murder of 10-year-old Deshaun Swatson back in October 2015 was the final straw for the community. Shortly after, the Butler-Tarkington Neighborhood Association called Indy 10-Point to step in.
They informed us that This was the fourth shooting that they had in less than 2 months, and they talked to us about the possibility of coming into the neighborhood and helping.
It's been boots on the ground since then. The coalition is made up of religious leaders, former gang members, and ex-convicts. Some still have street cred, helping gain trust in the community.
You have to have the community trust if you want to solve issues, because what people don't know, the community knows.
Coalition President Reverend Charles Harrison says their efforts has helped indict 2 gangs from the Butler-Tarkington neighborhood.
Our job is, how do we keep little Charles alive? How do we keep him alive? And then how can we put him on a pathway of success so that he doesn't end up in prison nor end up in the grave?
Again, that was Aaliyah Hodges reporting. She also reports Reverend Harrison believes Butler-Tarkington is a model not just for Indianapolis, but for the nation in helping reduce crime. A news conference is scheduled for 2 this afternoon. A new education bill focused on social justice issues is moving forward at the State House with some changes. The House Education Committee approved House Bill 1134 yesterday. After modifications Wednesday, in its current form, the legislation would allow teachers to discuss current and past injustices. But educators would not be allowed to teach that one group inherently causes another group's condition. The bill sparked a debate between 2 state representatives and former teachers.
Tulsa, Jim Crow, Wounded Knee. I was a U.S. history teacher. I taught those things. I taught them with facts. Facts is different than theory, and that's where I'm going with this.
Well, people are concerned about whether or not, as black folks, we would be able to teach the ills of slavery, address racism, which is dividing our country today, whether we'll be able to talk about the critical racial theory.
The measure now goes to the full House for a vote. The state Senate says there is no timeline for its version of the bill. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says he will not cooperate with the committee investigating the insurrection. The panel asked him to provide information voluntarily regarding details about former President Donald Trump's mental state surrounding the riots. McCarthy released a statement about the commission. He says it's not conducting a legitimate investigation. He also says it's only focused on damaging the Republicans. Vice Chairwoman of the committee, Liz Cheney, says the group may subpoena McCarthy. She's accusing him of trying to cover up the events of January 6th.
We know that Leader McCarthy was pleading with the president to tell people to go home when police officers and others were being beaten here at the Capitol. So, I wish that he were a brave and honorable man. He's clearly trying to cover up what happened. He has an obligation to come forward, and we'll get to the truth.
McCarthy is the 3rd Republican the committee has requested to cooperate. And today, the House is set to move 2 voting rights bills forward to get them in front of the Senate. President Joe Biden meets with Senate Democrats today to talk strategy for the Freedom to Vote Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The House is consolidating the bills into one. Senate Republicans are standing firm against the changes and Biden's call this week to end the filibuster to get the votes done.
That's just about the best argument for the filibuster you could possibly imagine.
One leading Democrat has mixed reviews for the president. Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin says Biden may have gone a little too far during the speech, but he backs the bills.
The bottom line is this: if you are legally eligible to vote, we ought to make it easy.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the Senate will be able to pass the bills by Martin Luther King Day, which is Monday. To get it done, he'll have to convince at least 2 holdout Democrats to change their decisions. An Indiana Republican congressman is moving on. Representative Trey Hollingsworth says he will not seek re-election. Hollingsworth was first elected in 2016. He made the announcement in an Indy Star op-ed. He writes, "Though I have remained committed to that promise these 3 terms, now I will fight for you and us in different ways." Now to an IT-Mate report in what could be a tumultuous tax season. The warning is coming straight from the IRS, as millions are still waiting for tax refunds from last year's filing. We spoke to an IU clinical professor of accounting. He tells IT-Mate any kind of paperwork sent to the IRS is only going to hold returns even longer. He adds, for most taxpayers and tax preparers, the hard part is getting a hold of the IRS when there are issues.
Problem is the second they have to deal with the IRS. The IRS answered 11% of the phone calls they received last year. That's all. 89% went unanswered, and that includes those that were on hold for a long time and got disconnected. It is a nightmare. It is worse than ever.
The IRS set up a free file program that becomes available Friday. It lets people who made $73,000 or less in 2021 to file free electronically. And this morning, we're seeing exactly how much more we're spending on specific items that make up the Consumer Price Index. The CPI jump of 7% year to year came out Monday. It was the biggest jump in nearly 40 years since the late 70s and early 80s, when wild spikes were more common. Families are still feeling the pinch on nearly all everyday items nationwide. Chicken is up more than 10% compared to last year, seafood up over 8%, gas nearly 50%. New cars and trucks 12% more expensive over the last year. Analysts say there are many reasons for the spike, and many trace directly back to the pandemic.
Really scrambled global supply chains, particularly in Asia, Southeast Asia. Factories shut down, ports shut down, created shortages of all kinds of things, from vehicles to lumber to clothing, and that caused prices to rise. And of course, the pandemic has made people sick and made a lot of other people fearful of going to work because they might get sick, and that leads to labor shortages.
Analysts expect prices to stay high through winter. Then gas and energy prices will likely come down in the next 3 to 6 months, with food prices to then follow. Hundreds of new jobs are on the way to Indiana. The city of Franklin says a new Amazon center is coming soon. City leaders tell us that the building will be located near the I-65 interchange. Amazon's looking for employees to help with receiving inventory, sorting and shipping orders, and handling network logistics. The city is not sharing any official date yet, but says it's planning for the business to open this year. Colts general manager Chris Ballard will tackle tough questions today. He's set to face cameras and reporters. The Colts failed to make the playoffs with Sunday's loss in Jacksonville. We'll bring you Ballard's news conference live at noon on Wish TV. And this morning, the team's owner says the team ended the season in perhaps the worst way possible. The comment is part of an open message to fans in which Jim Irsay promises to make the Colts a contending team. Irsay's message ends with a promise of some exciting days to come. The Pacers are looking to turn their season around after losing 4 of the last 5 games. After going on the road to Boston Monday, the team hosted the Celtics last night. The team couldn't recover from a double-digit deficit in the first, losing 119-100. Miles Turner led the way with 18 points. Head coach Rick Carlisle says the team's optimistic with 40 games left to play.
I just think it's hard to evaluate the whole situation after a game like tonight. Yeah, it's a long season. It's game 42. And it'll go by fast, but there's a lot left.
The Pacers' next game is tomorrow at home against the Phoenix Suns. Tip-off is at 7 p.m. Registration is open for volunteers for the 2022 500 Festival. Each year, the festival relies on thousands of volunteers to help ensure all events go off without a hitch. This year, it's looking for 7,000 volunteers to help in more than 100 areas. All volunteers will receive a shirt, a pin, snacks and beverages, and special or free access to certain events. Sign-ups are online. In order to receive all of the perks, you'll need to register by April 13th. This has been your News 8 Daily 8. For Wish TV, I'm Kylie Conway. Online at wishtv.com and follow us on Facebook when you search Wish TV.
This is the News 8 Daily 8 podcast with Wish TV's Kylie Conway. A Wish TV News 8 update on demand. For even more, on demand and on the go. Connect with Wish TV on Facebook at wishtv.com and on the free Wish TV mobile app. Thank you for listening. And be sure to like, subscribe, and follow this podcast for updates every weekday morning on the All Indiana Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcast.